Dottie.
Hi, Dawn.
It's good to be back into this circle of sharing with folks what we're doing on our Thursday evenings. We've started a new series called Songs of Rage, and we are looking at the Psalms and primarily the themes of lament, cries of justice, and even violence and anger and rage that we hear in the Psalms. And we're challenging ourselves to go really deep into some of those really hard feelings. And that was so true last night. Dottie brought us through some really good stuff. So Dottie, do you want to share what you shared with us?
Yeah. So in preparation for this week, my hope was to find these cries of justice, right? Like one of the things that we love in the Psalms is how much there is a longing for justice to come. And as I was looking around and trying to figure out, like, where are the cries of justice? We see justice themes all throughout the Psalms, but there's this category of Psalms called the imprecatory Psalms or the cursing Psalms. And it was new to me learning about these. And it's almost a more intense version of lament where the psalmist is writing and crying out, almost cursing the person or the nation or whoever it is, the enemy, for what they've done, and saying, God, like, put violence on them or like show them a consequence. And it's really, really intense. And previously, when I've read these, I've been quite disgusted by the psalmist anger at moments, or I've really empathized to like the hurt and harm that's happened. But there's so many emotions in these imprecatory Psalms. And so we looked at what are imprecatory Psalms and how it's really just a intense lament showing the depths of hurt and someone's humanity, crying out to God for relief. And that was really huge for us to recognize and to humanize the psalmist in their pain. And so we looked at some imprecatory Psalms, and then we connected it to Dr. Martin Luther King's a letter from Birmingham Jail, where he is saying the oppressor is not going to call on freedom. The oppressed have to. And in King's work, there's just this consistent theme of the need to call out injustice, right? Like there is this really intense need for that. And one of our favorite quotes we've said many times at Harbor that we revisited was that he was most concerned in this letter for the white moderate who chooses order over disorder. And we wrestled with that in our small groups. It was really, really good to ask ourselves, like, how are we pursuing order over justice? Or not disorder, but that the white moderate chooses order over justice. So we wrestled with that. And then we looked at a prayer, a very rich, incredible prayer by Dr. Chanequa Walker-Barnes. And this prayer is featured in Sarah Bessey's book, A Rhythm of Prayer. And it is a beautiful modern example of an imprecatory prayer, where it's called a prayer of a weary Black woman, I think was the title. And it begins with this line, "Dear God, help me to hate white people, or at least help me to try." And so that prayer was just really powerful for us to move through and see Dr. Chanequa Walker-Barnes, who's a clinical psychologist and a minister, example how to move through these really intense emotions of rage, how to move through her own violence that she's experienced, the harm that she's experienced, and plead to God for relief. And we looked at some articles that gave a lot of context to her work, and we just really received this prayer as a gift that we got to go into such an intimate and intense prayer from Dr. Chanequa Walker-Barnes. So it was really good and followed by some great discussion. Yeah.
Same in my group. We went, we really dug in. And but before we go to that, I just want to ask you one question. When you introduced Prayer of a Weary Black Woman to us, you gave us a lot of preparation and qualification. You really prepared us, and then you invited a few of us to share in reading it aloud. And I'm curious how you felt that went. Like, how was your experience of that, of sharing that in our community, which is primarily white? And although we are very grateful for the people of color who are present with us, but we are primarily, not primarily, we are mostly a white community. And so our community is mostly white people. And so, yeah, how did you experience sharing that prayer with us and the response to it?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Dawn. What I appreciate about the bravery of King's work and Dr. Chanequa Walker-Barnes is they both call out the white progressives, right? Which is a lot of the makeup of Harbor. And so I was nervous, although most of us are really familiar with King's work and this calling out, I was nervous of like, how will our group receive this? And I had us all take a deep breath. And before I shared the prayer, I checked in and I said, let's get a temperature check of the room. Are we ready to receive these words? Right? Like, are we? And the group was enthusiastic and was like, yes, we are ready. And I was really grateful that we could receive these words with intense rage, intense lament, intense pain, intense calling out of different type of white people. And in my small group, one person said, this prayer was so good to read, and I had to recognize that I was a part of the prayer. Like, I was one of the pieces that she was calling out. And so I was really grateful for the groundedness. Our community was ready to receive that prayer and ready to honor her words, and really just cherish this like imprecatory prayer of our current moment. And our group was like, a lot of us will not experience the pain that she's experienced as a Black woman. And how do we cry with her, right? How do we join with her in this imprecatory prayer and join in on her rage? And it was, just really powerful. And I'm glad that our community dove into it and really appreciated her incredible heart for this work of reconciliation and justice.
Yeah, thank you. My small group too was like, we all kind of we gathered together. And I always do a check, be like, okay, how are we all doing? Like, do we need a breath? And even I was like, I just need to shake out. Like, I'm just gonna do a bit of this. I'm like, I just got energy. It's not good. It's not bad. I just got energy. I need to get out. And then we started. And so we always start when we do our small groups with looking at our past experience with a particular passage or a particular theme, and sharing how we've learned about this in the past and maybe how our thinking has shifted. And we noticed a couple of things about these kinds of psalms. For some of us, they're often either completely ignored in our traditions, or pieces are cut out of it when we read them aloud, so that we're not reading the violence, that's calling on some terrible acts of violence. So we just ignore them. We wrestled with what it means to be angry in God's presence, because many of us were taught in our prayer that we should be praying to God to help us not be angry.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to come to God honestly with complete sincerity, and to say, and to just express it, and to even do it without qualification, right? To just be like, here it is. Like, I'm not going to try and make you feel better about this, God. I'm not going to try and prepare you for this. Like, here's my rage. And how liberating that can be, but also pretty scary when we've got so many other messages. The other message I heard that just, and a lot of people resonated, and I just felt it, was someone said they grew up with the fear that if they did not behave or do what, or if they displeased God, they would become the subject of those songs. And to receive that rage, which is supposed to be an expression of this beautiful expression of our full humanity, and to receive that as directed towards you, excuse me, that felt so painful for me.
That's really interesting. The majority of our group that grew up in white churches said that they didn't study these, and that it was more of a focus of songs of praise. And then one person who grew up in a Black church said this was a part of the fabrics of our church. Like, we look to these Psalms all the time as lament. And I thought that was a really interesting cultural difference too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really powerful.
So just as we're drawing to a close, I wonder, is there anything, and I don't know my answer to this question yet either, but is there anything like a next step or any questions that are still lingering, or things that are unresolved? I want to work more on expressing my true emotions to God, and just being as real as I can. I started that in my journal this morning, and it was really hard to not write like, dear God, I just want to know that I'm really mad, and I don't mean that. I was like, this is what I want. This is where I'm frustrated. It's really hard. Make it better. Even though I know it's more complicated than that, but that was the desire of my heart. So I just wonder if there's anything you're taking away from last night.
There's this phrase in psychology, or everywhere, I guess, but like, what we suppress, we express. And so I think these Psalms offer a very candid way of accessing the depths of our whole selves. And instead of villainizing emotions, going in them and going through them so that we don't cause more harm. Right. So I don't know what's lingering. I think like an invitation to deeper spiritual practices of rage and lament, with it in mind that we are moving through them to not inflict more harm. We don't want these things to actually happen. Like, we don't want violence to actually happen on other people, but to really like access the depth of ourselves, and to move through it, so that we can participate in deeper ways in the work of shalom and justice, right? So lots to, I don't know, I will keep like wrestling with this one over time. I found I was learning a lot in the process of getting ready for this week, and also learning from those in the group. So
Same. Well, thank you. It's good to see you. From
Have
across the continent, and we'll see you next week, and John will be back, so be glad to see him too.